Good. So this is the second of 3 panel conversations this evening that we're hosting here at Global Street Art. So thank you for hosting us. And today we're bringing together academics and practitioners, both from the Royal Geographical Society conference that took place this week, and from the industry and world of painting and graffiti and street art. And we'll be talking through questions of what it means to paint and intervene on walls in public spaces. And so to do that this evening, there are 5 of us on the second panel. So my name's Tom, and I'm currently a PhD candidate at Uppsala University in Sweden. And my research is concerned with painting in particularly East London. And so I will now take some time to introduce everyone. So first of all, we have Nian.
Okay. Hi, I'm Nian. I'm from India. I'm an academician, geographer. I work on public art and public spaces. And I finished my PhD on public art and its impact on urban spatial transformation in Delhi. And have looked at one open air art district in London called Lodhi Art District, which is also very famous internationally. Slum beautification programs through murals, as well as murals in transit. So I would be speaking from my research, the challenges and the findings that I have come across. And I'm hoping that it will contribute to the discussion today. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. And we're also joined tonight by Moral.
Hi, my name is Masuoka. I'm representing an organization called Beautify Earth. We are originally based in the States, where we still work, but I currently live in Scotland, and so I come from both a US and a UK perspective. My personal background is in social policy from a research perspective, but I also have a professional background that covers civic engagement and nonprofit administration and arts education. And so I come from a couple of different perspectives, both from an academic and practitioner. And then Beautify Earth, the organization that I'm representing, we work it with murals in a variety of capacities. So we started in Los Angeles, have been working there really from a grassroots perspective, but have developed over the years, particularly working with the city of Santa Monica and the city of Los Angeles to develop community mural programs there, but have also expanded to work all across the states with a variety of actors, from other nonprofits and community organizations to different cities to different brands, all sorts of folks. So a wide range of information that I'm trying to bring tonight. And I will try and keep it as concise as possible.
Thank you. And we also are joined by Selma.
Yes, hi, I'm Selma. I'm currently a research master's student at the University of Amsterdam. I'm originally from Romania, but I've been based in the Netherlands between The Hague and Amsterdam for the past 4 years, where I did a bachelor's in liberal arts and sciences at Leiden University College, where that sort of gave me a background in what I like to think of as reading behind the lines. And there I took a course in public spaces where everything sort of just came together for me. And so I went onto this path of urban studies. So now I started with looking at graffiti and street art. And that's slowly developed into an interest in, okay, but what are they on? Then I looked at walls, and then I realized walls are surrounded by other things. And so now I have a general research interest in surfaces, but also infrastructure, surfaces as infrastructure, and how these contribute to creating the everyday dynamics we live in, both seen and unseen.
And we're also joined by Giulia.
Hi, I'm Giulia. I'm a freelance writer and content creator specializing in graffiti and street art. In 2011, I launched my independent street art blog. And so I've been writing both for myself and for magazines. I've been working in the fields, like for collaborating with a mural festival. I work for Stadtmuseum and other organizations. So I'm not a researcher here, and my finding today will come from my experience in the field.
And in terms then of your findings that you're talking about today, what is something we're gonna all talk about? What is the key finding that you find in your practice?
Okay, so my key finding is quite surprising, because I'm talking about the audience of street art, urban art, and with this I mean both online audience and offline audience, so people you meet at a festival opening and so on. And my finding is that the primary audience engaging with street art is people over 50 years old, which is quite weird because when I start, I always associated street art and graffiti with something, young, rebellious. But after so many years of experiences, attending festivals and so on, I saw that the people that really engage with it, and again, I mean both online, so for example, reading my blog, writing emails to me, but also offline. And so, for example, attending festival or stopping artists to photograph them or asking questions. They are, people with a certain age, let's call them third generation. And this is quite a surprising finding.
Okay.
Also, one last thing. Also, if you think about the digital world, for example, Instagram, all the Instagram accounts I know, they're all managed by, none of them are run by people of, 20 years old. And I still yet to see, one teenager stopping a street artist in the street and asking question about their practice or something. So, this is my finding.
Okay. And Selma, so your findings on your research on urban surfaces in Amsterdam.
Well, it's not just in Amsterdam, I'd say. I think so. I'd like to address my main findings, so to speak, on both the personal and the conceptual, I guess, quite shortly. On the personal level, I guess it's a bit cheesy to say, but once you see them for what they are, and the surfaces and what surrounds us, you always find new things wherever you are. And so it's a constant game of finding for me and reading the space that I'm in and understanding contextuality better, I guess, at the end of the day. And then conceptually, I guess for me, the big takeaway was how for granted we take the material realities that surround and shape our world, and we sort of consider. I don't mean to generalize, but we tend to not look at what's behind the graffiti or behind the post or underneath our feet. And I find that once you start paying attention, you can read the politics of a place, the power dynamics of a place, the inclusion and exclusion of a place, again, through the seen, but especially through the unseen, the absences. Which walls are clean? Which streets have sort of cracks in the bricks? How long has that been there? And so through looking at both individual experiences with this, but then also larger patterns, I think there's so much we have yet to uncover and understand about how we directly interact with these surroundings and how they interact with us.
Thank you. Yeah, and so we've had findings now about not only the audience of things like street art and these kinds of painting on walls, but also the power dynamics in both the presence of paintings on walls, but also the absence of these things. And in your practice, Moral, how would you describe your sort of overarching finding on, in this case, sort of painting walls?
Yeah, so I think the big concept for me is around infrastructure, and it might not be infrastructure as we know it with buildings and roads, but infrastructure is a larger topic around processes and systems that really encompass all of the different pieces that we all represent. So I think the biggest piece is how the infrastructure that we can build around street art is really important in order to build a culture, especially related to community art, have community arts be more of a normalized practice. This comes from a perspective of community development and how we really connect and build social fabric within our local communities. And I think that there's a couple pieces that I'll very quickly unpack in here. And I think the community art piece especially, because I think that really lends itself to bigger strategies around the people that we're serving, having a people first approach, but also making sure that we are contextualizing the work that we're doing with kind of larger strategies. So I think even the term impact can be something really interesting to look at in terms of how are we looking at larger public health issues? There's a bulk of research on art and health and how we deal with that in society, especially social cohesion. So how can the work that we do become more collaborative? And I think that's where infrastructure steps in, being able to have more of a collaborative approach between organizations, sharing processes, creative processes, figuring out funding methods, even governance and economic structures of the organizations that are carrying out these projects. So I think there's a real lack of infrastructure that's kind of preventing this full impact from coming through and having this long-term impact as well. But I think that we see that in both an organization capacity, but also I think in a digital infrastructure. So that's the other piece we work on, is how can we actually, we have a digital platform, and how can we provide that as a resource for artists, a resource for researchers, but also to kind of bring all these elements together in a place that people can access easily.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing you touched on at the beginning there was community, and paintings being a really important part of the fabric of communities, and I completely agree there. I think that's really key, and I think that links pretty nicely to what I think Nian is going to tell us about your sort of the key findings in your work in India.
Yeah. So I would like to probably start with the fact that maybe that we must look at images as vectors, as a verb, because it acts in the way that not only the immediate surroundings of that image is shaped, but also the people who interact with it, which brings me to the question is, we should not view artists and the audience as unpolitical actors, or apolitical actors. They should be seen as political actors who are very much embedded in the way a city is governed. And we must problematize, I feel, when we are talking about community projects and the importance of murals. Coming from my practice with young women in Delhi, I think we see community as a very homogeneous entity, and we must unpack the idea of community and see that it can be extremely hierarchical. And we must address the concerns, address the intersectionalities of it, when as an artist, through their practice, they must address these concerns when they are looking at the practice of the murals and graffiti or street art. Third thing I would like to say, and which kind of connects to the first session, was what Malarkey said. And I feel that surfaces are not static. I feel surfaces are extremely mobile, because from my practice, surfaces, it's mobility. How the images on surfaces have traveled in a globalizing world, have traveled across countries and influenced the people in terms of how they see the location of the place, how they imagine the country, because that has impacted the way that they represent India in their artwork. That is one of the key findings from my work. And yeah, I would like to stop there and maybe take up questions through the discussion.
Thank you. Yeah. I think this is the point where I'll talk about my work now, I suppose. But I think my work in lots of ways touches on lots of the things we've discussed. But I think the key finding kind of links to lots of what we've spoken about, and most of my work in London so far has really emphasized that when we think about paintings on walls, we often think about the painting as a noun. Like, this is a painting on a wall, this is a mural, or this is a piece of graffiti. But painting's also a verb. And I think the idea that painting is something that's simply on a wall misses out the fact that in time and again in the interviews that I conduct in my research, painting is described as a process, and it's this process of painting that I'm finding is the most important thing. What are the sort of power dynamics laden in that painting? Who is doing that painting? What's being painted, and why is it being painted? Why is that painting happening there? Is it a community painting? Is it a commercial painting? Is it more of a sort of cultural painting? We were touching on some of those dynamics from earlier. And is it a sort of site-specific painting? Could this painting be anywhere, or is this a painting that's just happening here? And what are the stories and histories that are going into this act of painting? Is this art? Is this labor? Who's being painted to paint the painting? And I think these are all sort of central questions that I'm finding in my work here. This idea that when we are thinking about painting, it's not just painting murals, and the mural is the finished product, right? These are murals that are that have got an entire sort of set of processes behind them that lead up to that point. But there are also key challenges that we have been finding in our research. So who would like to start perhaps with a key challenge that they found? That sounds like an invitation. So
I'm sitting here, so many challenges.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I can start. I'm actually going to go back to the prior discussion on cultural versus commercial versus aesthetic value, because I think probably a lot of people in this room have experience when you talk about what it is you're interested in or what it is you do. The conversation goes one way. For example, I often get, "Oh, but tags are so ugly." I'm like, yeah, okay, but that's not necessarily the whole conversation. That's not necessarily what I'm interested in or what I see as the problem. And so I think the problem, as I see it, as I started with my interest in public spaces, is that public spaces are where we read society, right, and social life. And then from there, we get to the idea that, okay, life on the walls, having space on the walls is having space in social life, right? You talked a bit about this as well. And then the question is, okay, but how do we make more space on the wall? And then comes in the idea of conflict. And I'd like to think of conflict as potentially generative in a creative way. Sometimes, of course, there can be creative destruction involved. Unfortunately, I think conflict is a word that is very much vilified and is seen in only a specific way nowadays and in today's political climate. But so I think that the challenge that I see is how do we reconsider sort of spatial justice on and of the walls in a generative manner. And the biggest challenge there is bypassing the traditional structures of people and institutions that have the power and the money to decide these, So, because sometimes you try and you say, okay, we're making space on the wall now, but you end up falling back in the same cycles, then reproduce the same dynamics. And of course, these are contingent on where you are and what those dynamics were prior. And that opens up all of the conflicts and the challenges that made me react the way I did when we started the conversation. So yeah, but then I think I'd underlie this idea of, okay, how do we make conflict actually generative? How do we open it up and get people to want to participate in the public sphere that shapes their public space, that shapes their public life?
Yeah, this idea of conflict being generative, I think this is particularly important, right? Like trying to see what we can do with this and where we can take it and how we can kind of make it productive, I suppose, in some ways, to start having these conversations about why it's so important to kind of address this idea of painting on walls. So, yeah. And Giulia, what kinds of challenges do you face?
My challenge is kind of connect with the cultural value of graffiti and also what you were saying, that a painting is not just a painting, colors on wall, but you can go beyond and see the whole process of painting. And my challenge is not a new one. It's what I've been doing for all these years of blogging. And it's basically bridging the gap between graffiti, street art, urban art, whatever, with the general public. In this way to foster a more engaged and active connection with the public space that we all inhabit. Because while, graffiti, street art, it's everything all around us every day, many people just pass by it. So they don't understand it, or they don't know the story that it's behind it, or they don't know the specific cultural value of that, graffiti or tags. So through my work, I try to tell these stories, to share these values. And in this way, I hope that people will have a more active experience of the public space, to understand and read the walls, because, it's already there, and if you don't understand it, you just feel it as a noise, as a visual noise, something dirty, something that needs to be clean. But if you understand the value of it, you can also just enjoy the time that you're waiting for the tube because, someone has written his name on it. So it's this is my goal.
Great, thank you. And this sort of, this aspect of engagement and trying to sort of engage the public and identifying this gap, I think I'm imagining this might tie in nicely to more challenges that you find in research. But this aspect, given your work in trying to engage the public sort of socially, and how we can kind of work to produce sort of murals that are so cohesive with communities. What are the kind of challenges that you find, if they're related to that?
Well, I think we have to start with funding. That has to be addressed. And I think it's not only funding, but it's the right type of funding. It's funding that is comprehensive, not something that needs to be accomplished quickly, but that can go into a more co-creative and a process that has care behind it. It's figuring out what those different processes are of how we're creating artwork, making sure that we're having a level of depth and quality within that, but also having it have participation that is meaningful outside of just maybe cutting up some paper and contributing, but actually having that long-term impact. So I think that's a pretty obvious one, but I think that leads back to my conversation on infrastructure and the processes, and especially from an organization capacity that's looking at how do we approach community development from both a local, and then how do we take those practices and then kind of share them across different local environments. I think that's something within this, I'll say, quote unquote, mural street art industry that has evolved that we have to reckon with, is how we're actually using these processes. How are we discussing and coming out of our individual organizations and talking about what does funding look like? How are we creating artwork? Because it feels very siloed at the moment. And so I think it's how do we do that? And then how do we use that to advocate for more funding, for more recognition about the value of art in relation to communities, in relation to health, in relation to social cohesion, and all these factors that are such challenges, especially at this time.
Yeah, definitely. The funding question is huge, right? This is there's no painting.
And the right funding.
And the right funding,
Yeah.
the right kinds of funding.
Yeah.
And so, Nian, what kinds of challenges are you facing in your research?
So one, I agree with Salma's point about how images can be sites of conflict, but those conflicts can be very generative in terms of how they provoke important questions in the community. But at the same time, I also challenge that I face is how we understand the concept of co-production that a lot of artists today use. And we must problematize and unhinge the concept of co-production, because we need to think deeper when we say that, we've co-produced publics. What publics have you co-produced with, and who are those publics? We need to address that, and artists need to address that. So that is one of the challenges that I faced when I was trying to work with work as well as research walls and images in my country. So yes, that is one of the challenges.
Great, thank you. This, I think the challenges that I'm going to talk about kind of touch on lots of these, I think, and I think particularly this question of funding is a challenge that I see as sort of oriented around how do we get different people to communicate with each other, right? Like how do we know where the funding is for a start, and then how do we ensure that the funding can get to the right place, and how can we ensure that it sort of goes to the right hands? And in this context, I feel the biggest challenge that I find in my research is this question of communication, and this question of sort of, if you're painting a mural on a wall, how do we communicate between the council that sort of regulates mural painting in this part of the city, and how do we communicate then with people that are painting the mural, and how do we communicate with the artists that are going to paint the mural, the marketers that might be managing this kind of mural if it's a commercial mural, or the community groups if it's a community-based mural? How do we get them to kind of speak together? How do they know the funding landscape? And if they don't know the funding landscape, why do they not know the funding landscape? How can we kind of foster greater cohesion in lots of ways? Because I find that in my work here in London, there are some people that don't know that actually very close by, there are other people that actually would be able to help them really well, but they haven't sort of connected with each other, and they haven't connected with other artists who haven't connected with other sort of community groups. So I think really that question of communication and kind of trying to establish connections between groups is a really key challenge that I face in trying to kind of get access to these groups in a lot of the ways. And I think in terms of trying to solve that, again, it's having conversations like these. It's kind of getting people together that are doing this research, that are practicing this work, and talking to exchange these ideas to ensure that when we are painting, we are able, to ensure that when people are painting, they're able to communicate not only with what's going on in terms of research and kind of share their ideas, but also kind of work with each other and kind of forge this more collaborative landscape, I suppose. As a researcher, that would be great, right? If we could, sort of talk to one person who says yes, talk to them, then that would be great. So yeah, that's what I'd say. So
If I can just
yeah, of course.
quickly on that, I think it's very, sometimes when you talk about research, somebody says, okay, and then what are you going to do with it? You found this thing out, and then what's the next step? What are you empirically putting out there? And I think, stuff like this is great, and we should be talking, and we should be talking with everyone who wants to be involved in any context. But then also that talking needs to go somewhere, and it's usually not the people who first start the discussion that don't want it to go. I think it's, there's this fear of trying out something new at an institutional level, at a societal level. But that's, I think, another big challenge just in general is, okay, we've talked and we're opening up discussions, but then let's also try the radically new thing. Sometimes I joke that, the municipality building is completely white. Let's just all paint that and see what happens. They would not let us do it right now, but if we talk about it, let's just see, try the alternative. So I think it's step one, spaces for talking and actually involving as many people and voices as possible. But step two is getting rid of that sort of reticence that keeps us from trying it and actually challenging and saying, okay, we've talked. Can we do it now?
Yeah.
And I also feel that, along with Selma's point, that as much as we concentrate on pre-production of the artwork, we must also think about the afterlife, right? What happens after the image is there. And there can be a lot of conversation after that, which must influence or can influence, I would say, our next artworks or whatever, the location that we choose, and in fact, the communities that we can engage. So that's the conversation that should happen at both the end of the artwork, before we produce the artwork as well as after we produce the artwork. So it's very important. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say this, it links to this idea that it's a process, and it's also an ongoing process.
Yeah,
It's after something has been painted, there's also this kind of process of what happens afterwards, and questions also of maintenance, like how long is this painting going to stay there, and who's going to look after it?
And how other people interact with it. Either other maybe writers or other artists or just kids from the street or posters. It's alive. It's not like a painting in a gallery. At least that's what I like about it. It's a living organism. So you have to follow the whole process.
Definitely.